So this is another study and stream. Today I'm going to talk about 11th paragraph of the book Beyond Good and Evil. Before, as usual, I'm going to recite the previous paragraphs from my memory, and let's do that. 1. The will to truth, which is to tempt us to many a hazardous enterprise, the famous truthfulness of which all philosophers have hitherto spoken with respect. What questions has this will to truth not laid before us? What strange, perplexing, questionable questions? It's already a long story, yet it seems as if it were hardly commenced. Is it any wonder that we at last grow distrustful, lose patience, and turn impatiently away? That this Sphinx at last teaches us to ask questions ourselves? Who is it really that puts questions to us here? What is really this will to truth in us? In fact, we made a long halt at the question as to the origin of this will, until we at last came to an absolute standstill before a yet more fundamental question. We inquired about the value of this will. Granted that we want the truth, why not rather untruth and uncertainty, even ignorance? The problem of the value of truth presented itself before us, or was it we who presented ourselves before the problem? Which of us is the Oedipus here, which the Sphinx? It would be a rendezvous of questions and notes of interrogation. And could it be believed at last could it be believed that it at last seems to us as if the problem had never been propounded before? As if we were the first to discern it, get a sight of it, and risk raising it, for there is a risk in raising it. Perhaps there is no greater risk. 2. How could anything originate out of its opposite? For example, truth out of error, or the will to truth out of the will to deception, or the generous deed out of selfishness, or the sun-bright vision of the wise man out of covetousness. Such genesis is impossible. Whoever dreams of it is a fool, nay, worse than a fool. Things of the highest value must have a different origin, an origin of their own. In this transitory, seductive, illusory, paltry world, in this turmoil of delusion and cupidity, they cannot have their source, but rather in the lap of being, in the intransitive, in the concealed God, in the thing itself. There must be their source, nowhere else. This mode of reasoning discloses a typical prejudice by which metaphysicians of all times can be recognized. In this mode of valuation is at the back of all their logical procedures. Through this belief of theirs, they exert themselves to their knowledge, to something that in the end solemnly correspond to the truth. The fundamental belief of metaphysicians is the belief in the antithesis of values. It never occurred even to the very wariest of them to doubt here, on the very threshold where doubt, however, is most necessary, though they had met a solemn vow, de omnibus dubitandum. For it may be doubted, firstly, that the antithesis exists at all, and secondly, that the popular valuations and antithesis of values, upon which metaphysicians have set their seals, are not merely superficial estimates, merely provisional perspectives, perhaps besides probably being made from some corner, perhaps from below, frog perspectives, as it were, to borrow an expression current among painters. In spite of all the value that may belong to the truth, to the unselfish, to the truth, the unselfish, the positive, it may be possible that a higher and more fundamental value generally for life should be assigned to pretense, to selfishness, to the will to delusion, to selfishness and cupidity. It might even be possible that what constitutes these good and respected things consists precisely in their being insidiously related knotted crochet to those evil and apparently opposed things, perhaps even in being essentially identical with them, perhaps. But who wishes to concern himself with such dangerous perhapses? For that investigation, one must await the advent of a new order of philosophers, such as will have different tastes and inclinations, the reverse of those hitherto prevalent, philosophers of the dangerous, perhaps in all sense of the term. And to speak in all seriousness, I see such philosophers beginning to appear. 3. Having kept a sharp eye on philosophers and having read between their lines for long enough, I now say to myself that the greater part of the conscious thinking must be counted among the instinctive functions. And it is so even the case of philosophical thinking. One has here to learn anew as one learned anew about heredity and innateness. As little as the act of birth comes into consideration in the whole process and procedure of heredity, just as little being conscious is opposed to the instinctive in any decisive sense. The greater part of the conscious thinking of a philosopher secretly influenced by his instincts and forced into definite channels, and behind all logic and its seeming sovereignty of movement, there are valuations, or to speak more plainly, physiological demands for the maintenance of a definite mode of life. For example, that the certain is worth more than the uncertain, that illusion is less valuable than truth. Such valuations, in spite of their regulatory importance for us, might, notwithstanding, be only superficial valuations, such as might be necessary for the maintenance of species such as ourselves. I forgot a special type of stupidity, such as might be necessary for the maintenance of species such as ourselves. Supposing in effect that man is not just the measure of things. 4. The falseness of an opinion is not for us any objection to it. It is here, perhaps, that our language sounds most strangely. The question is, however, the question is how far an opinion is life further and life preserving, species preserving, perhaps even species rearing. And we are fundamentally inclined to maintain that the falsest opinions to which the synthetic judgments a priori belong are the most indispensable for us, that without a recognition of logical fictions, without a comparison of reality to the purely imagined world of the absolute and immutable, without a constant counterfeiting of the world by means of numbers, man could not live. That a renunciation of false opinions would be a renunciation of life, negation of life. To recognize untruth as the condition of life, that is certainly to impugn the traditional ideas of value in a dangerous manner, and philosophy which ventures to do so has thereby alone placed itself beyond good and evil. 5. That which causes philosophers to be regarded half distrustfully and half mockingly is not the oft repeated discovery how innocent they are, how often and easily they make mistakes and lose their way, in short, how childish and childlike they are, but that there is not enough honest dealing with them, whereas they all raise a virtuous outcry when the problem of truthfulness is even hinted at in the remotest manner. They all pose as though their real opinions have been discovered and attained through the self-evolving of a cold, pure, divinely indifferent dialectic, in contrast to all sorts of mystics who fairer and foolisher talk of inspiration. Whereas in reality, whereas in fact, the prejudiced proposition, opinion, or suggestion, which is generally their heart's desire, abstracted and refined, is defended by them with arguments sought after the event. They all are advocates who do not wish to be regarded as such, generally astute defenders also of their prejudices, which they dub truths, and very far from having conscience which bravely admits this to itself, very far from having the good taste of courage, which goes so far as to let this be understood, perhaps to warn friend or foe, or in cheerful confidence and self-ridicule. The spectacle of the tartuffery of old Kant, by which he entices us into the dialectic by ways that lead, more correctly mislead, to his categorical imperative, makes us fastidious ones smile. We who find no small amusement in spying out the subtle tricks of old moralists and ethical preachers, or still more so, the hocus pocus in mathematical form, by means of which Spinoza, as it were, has clad his philosophy in mail and mask. In fact, the love of his wisdom, to translate the term fairly and squarely, to strike terror into the heart of the assailant who should dare to glance who should dare to have a glance, take a glance, who should dare to take a glance on that invincible maiden, that Pallas Athena. How much of personal timidity and vulnerability does the masquerade of a sickly recluse betray? 6. It has gradually become clear to me what every great philosophy up till now has consisted of, namely the confession of its originator and a species of involuntary and unconscious autobiography, and moreover that the moral or immoral purpose in every philosophy has constituted the true vital germ out of which the entire plant has always grown. Indeed, to understand how the abstrusest metaphysical assertions of a philosopher have been arrived at, it is always well and wise to first ask oneself, what morality do they or does he aim at? Accordingly, I do not believe that an impulse to knowledge is the father of philosophy, but that the other impulse has only made use of knowledge and mistaken knowledge as an instrument. For whoever considers the fundamental impulses of man with a view to determining how far they might have here acted as inspiring genii or as demons or kobolds, will find that they all have practiced philosophy at one time or another. That each one of them would have been only too glad to look upon itself as the ultimate end of existence and the legitimate lord over all the other impulses, for each impulse is impious, and as such attempts to philosophize. To be sure, in case of scholars, in case of the really scientific man, it may be otherwise, bare, if you will. There may really be such thing as an impulse to knowledge, some small independent clockwork which when well wounded up, works away industriously to that end, without the rest of scholarly impulses taking any material part therein. The actual interests of the scholar, therefore, are generally in quite another direction, in family perhaps, or in money making, or in politics. It is in fact almost indifferent at which point of research his little machine is placed, and whether the hopeful young Walker becomes a good philologist, a mushroom specialist, or a chemist. He's not characterized by becoming this or that. In philosopher, on the contrary, there is absolutely nothing impersonal, and above all, his morality furnishes the actual testimony of who he is. That is to say, in what order in what order his strongest instincts are placed to each other. Damn it, I forgot the last sentence, but anyway, I'll relearn it later. 7. How malicious philosophers can be. I know nothing of more stinging than the joke Epicurus took the liberty of making on Plato and Platonists. He called them Dionysiokolakas. In the original sense and on the face of it, the word signifies flatterers of Dionysius. Consequently, the tyrant accessors and lick spittles. Besides this, however, damn it, I'm beginning to forget it. I have to repeat it more often than just once a week. Besides this, however, okay, it meant an actor. So what was the point? Besides this, however, it is as much as to say they all are actors. There is nothing genuine about them. For Dionysiokolax was a popular name for an actor. The latter was the really malignant reproach that Epicurus cast upon Plato and Platonists. Upon Plato, he was annoyed by the grandiose manner, the mise-en-scène style, of which Plato and his scholars were masters, of which Epicurus was not a master. He, the old school teacher of Samos, who sat concealed in his garden and wrote 300 books, perhaps out of rage and ambitious envy for Plato. Who knows? Greece took 100 years to find out who the garden god Epicurus really was. Did she ever find out? 8. There is a point in every philosophy at which the conviction of a philosopher comes and appears on scene. Or to put it in the words of an ancient mystery, adventavit asinus, pulcher, and fortissimus. 9. You desire to live according to nature. O you noble Stoics, what fraud of words! Imagine to yourself a being like nature, boundlessly extravagant, boundlessly indifferent, without purpose or consideration, without pity or justice. At once, fruitful and barren and uncertain. Imagine to yourself indifference as a power. How could you live in accordance with such indifference? To live is not that endeavoring to be otherwise than this nature, is not living, evaluating, referring, being unjust, being limited, endeavoring to be different. And granted that your imperative, living according to nature, means actually the same as living according to life, how could you do differently? In reality, however, it's quite otherwise with you. While you pretend to read the canon of your law in nature, you want something quite the contrary. You extraordinary stage players and self-deluders. You, in your pride, you wish to dictate nature. You wish to dictate your morals and ideals to nature itself, and incorporate them therein. You insist that it shall be nature according to the Stoa, and would, as everything else, be made after your own image, as a vast, eternal glorification and generalism of Stoicism. With all your love for truth, you have forced yourself so long, so persistently, and with such a hypnotic rigidity that you rigidity to see nature falsely, that is to say stoically, that you are no longer be able to see it otherwise. And to crown all, some unfathomable superciliousness gives you the bedlamite hope that because you are able to tyrannize over yourselves, Stoicism is self-tyranny, nature will also allow herself to be tyrannized over. Is not a Stoic part of nature, but this is an old story, an old and everlasting story. What happened in old times with the Stoics still happens today. As soon as ever philosophy begins to believe in itself, it creates a world in its own image. It cannot do otherwise. Philosophy is this impulse, this tyrannical impulse itself, the will to creation of the world, the will to the will, the most spiritual will to truth, the will to creation of the world, the will to causa prima. 10. The eagerness and subtlety with which the eagerness and subtlety, I should even say craftiness, with which the problem of the real and apparent world is dealt with at present throughout Europe, furnishes food for thought and attention. And he who hears only a will to truth in the background, nothing else, cannot certainly boast of the sharpest ears. In rare and isolated cases, it may really have happened that such a will to truth, an extravagant and adventurous pluck, a metaphysician's ambition of the forlorn hope has participated therein. That which in the end always prefers a whole cartload, a handful of certainty to a whole cartload of beautiful possibilities. There may even be puritanical fanatics of conscience who prefer to put their last trust in a sure nothing rather than in an uncertain something. But this is nihilism, and the sign of a despairing, mortally wearied soul, notwithstanding the courageous bearing such a virtue may display. It seems, however, be otherwise with stronger and livelier thinkers who are still eager for life, in that they cite against appearance and speak superciliously of perspective, in that they rank the credibility of their own bodies about as low as the ocular evidence that the earth stands still, and thus apparently allowing their securest possession to escape. For what does one at present believe in more firmly than in one's own body? Who knows if they are not really trying to win back something which was formerly an even secure possession, something of the old domain of the faith of former times, perhaps the immortal soul, perhaps the old God. In short, ideas by which they could live better, that is to say, more vigorously and joyously than by modern ideas. There is distrust of these modern ideas in this mode of looking at things, a disbelief in all that has been constructed yesterday and today. There's perhaps some slight admixture of satiety and scorn, which can no longer endure the bric-a-brac of ideas of the most varied origin, such as so-called positivism throws on the market, a disgust of the more refined taste at the village fair mottliness and patchiness of these reality philosophers, in whom there's nothing either new or true, except this mottliness. Therein, it seems to me that we should agree with those skeptical anti-realists and knowledge microscopists of the present day. Their instinct, which repels them from modern reality, is unrefuted. What do their retrograde bypaths concern us? the main thing about them is not that they wish to go back, but that they wish to get away therefrom. A little more strength, swing, courage, and artistic power, and they would be off and not back. Wow. Okay, now let's go and read the 11th paragraph. It gets harder and harder to read this in the beginning, but well, I think it's the main motivation. I mean, if I cancel it, if I stop reading the entire thing, or reciting the entire thing from my memory at the beginning, I'll lose motivation to to go on. I at least want to memorize the first chapter. There are more, like 12 more paragraphs, though some of them are quite short, like 15, 17, 18, 19. 19 is long, 20, 21, 22, 23. Yeah, I guess it's like half of the way. So now I've got through the half of the way, if we count from the first paragraph, not from the introduction, though I knew the introduction before I started working on this book. I mean, I memorized introduction at the end of 2019, and I only repeated it a couple of times to remember it. So, but in terms of how much I've already got through, I guess there's half. Yeah, there's half. It's the half. So today I'm going to get through the 11th paragraph. Yeah, the point is I want to keep it all in mind. I don't want to lose it. I want to see whether or not I'm able to memorize the first chapter and preserve it. So, and I see that probably I just need to repeat it a little bit more often, since once a week I forget something and then it gets a little bit, I don't like when I forget it. So when I read it from my memory, when I recite it, when I forget it, makes me feel annoyed. And probably I just need to repeat it a few times more, or at least repeat it a few times before, making a studying stream. But anyway, yeah, my idea is I want to, I know that if I, let's say, continue reading and doing these studying streams without repeating at the beginning what I've memorized, it will make very little sense for me. I will not continue memorizing the whole thing. So I want to go on. Maybe this is a good idea, just to, I guess I'm going to do this, right? It's the best solution. So I'm going to leave it like the first 10 paragraphs. So next time I'm going to start from 11 paragraph, and I'm going to repeat it only once a month. So the entire paragraph, but before reading it, before reciting it, I'm going to prepare. So I mean, like as I do with the preface. So I don't repeat the preface every time. I recite it only once a month. And the same I'm going to do with the first 10 paragraphs. Whereas now I'm going to, speed up, and every new studying stream, I'm going to start from, reciting 11th paragraph, then 12th paragraph, etc., then 11, 12, 11, 12, 13, etc. Okay, today I don't want to talk too much. I discovered that, lots of things I still don't understand while I'm doing this studying stream, and understanding comes to me much later. So when I'm memorizing the paragraph, when I think about it, when I repeat it, I see new insights, and I don't think it's necessary to talk about it for too much. So I'm just gonna read it slowly. If there will be some misunderstanding, I'm going to try to figure that out. But basically, if I understand it from the first time, it doesn't make sense to talk about it for an entire hour or 2 hours. Okay, let's do the first reading. It seems to me that there is everywhere an attempt at present to divert attention from the actual influence which Kant exercised on German philosophy, and especially to ignore prudently the value which he set upon himself. Kant was first and foremost proud of his table of categories, with with it in his hand, he said, "This is the most difficult thing that I could ever be undertaking on behalf of metaphysics. Let us only understand this could be." He was proud of having discovered a new faculty in man, the faculty of synthetic judgment a priori. Granting that he deceived himself in this matter, the development and rapid flourishing of German philosophy depended nevertheless on his pride and on the eager rivalry of younger generation to discover, if possible, something, at all events, new faculties, of which to be still prouder. But let us reflect for a moment. It is high time to do so. How are synthetic judgments a priori possible? Kant asks himself, and what is really his answer? By means of a means faculty. But unfortunately, not in 5 words, but so circumstantially, imposingly, and with such display of German profundity and verbal flourishes, that one altogether loses sight of the comical niaisier. It's like it's stupidity. Alemande niaisier. Okay, let's translate it directly. Yeah, I guess it's French, perhaps. Detect language, English. Hey. German silliness. Yeah, niaisier, stupidity. Alemande. Wait. German. Yeah, Aleman. Okay. So Nietzsche involved in such an answer. People were beside themselves with delight over his new faculty, and the jubilation reached its climax when Kant further discovered the moral faculty in man. For at that time, Germans were still moral, not yet dabbling in the politics of hard fact. Then came the honeymoon of German philosophy. All the young theologians of the Tübingen institution went immediately into the groves, all seeking for faculties. And what did they not find in that innocent, rich, and still youthful period of German spirit, to which Romanticism, the malicious fairy, piped and sang, when one could not yet distinguish between finding and inventing? Above all, a faculty for the transcendental. Schelling christened it intellectual intuition, and thereby gratified the most earnest loneliness of the naturally pious inclined Germans. One can do no greater wrong to the whole of this exuberant and eccentric movement, which was really youthfulness, notwithstanding that it disguised itself so boldly in hoary and senile conceptions, than to take it seriously or even treat it with moral indignation. Enough, however, the world grew older and the dream vanished. A time came when people rubbed their foreheads, and they still rub them today. People had been dreaming, and first and foremost old Kant, by means of a means faculty, he had said, or at least meant to say. But is that an answer, an explanation, or is it not rather merely a repetition of the question? How does opium induce sleep? By means of a means faculty, namely the virtus dormitiva, replies the doctor in Moliere. Quia est an eo virtus dormitiva, cuius est natura sensus asso upire. But such replies belong to the realm of comedy, and it is high time to replace the Kantian question, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible, by another question, why is believing such judgments necessary? In effect, it is high time that we should understand that such judgments must be believed to be true for the sake of the preservation of creatures like ourselves, though they still might naturally be false judgments. Or more plainly spoken, and roughly and readily, synthetic judgments a priori should not be possible at all. We have no right to them. In our mouths, they are nothing but false judgments. Only, of course, the belief in their truth is necessary as plausible belief in ocular evidence belonging to the perspective view of life. And finally, to call to mind the enormous influence which German philosophy, I hope you understand its right to inverted commas, goose feet, has exercised throughout the whole of Europe. There is no doubt that a certain virtus dormitiva had a share in it. Thanks to German philosophy, it was a delight to the noble idlers, the virtuous, the mystic, the artist, the artisty. What's the word? A professional singer, dancer. Artist. All right. Is the French word? Yeah, French. It's like in Russian it sounds the same. Artist. The artist, the 3-4 Christians, and the political obscurantists of all nations to find an antidote to the still overwhelming sensualism which overflowed from the last century into this. In short, sensus asopere. All right, now I'm going to do my reading comprehension of this paragraph. Yes, I said I'm not going to, do it as I did before, and analyzing each sentence and embodying it in my personal experience, basically taking one sentence and talking everything what I know about all relative metaphors and concepts and ideas. I'm just going to go slowly and find some general ideas, even though I'm not concerned with general ideas. So I want to understand the structure of the paragraph, and I want to understand the basic concepts presented here. But anyway, okay, it seems to me that there is, like, what's the first sentence? Where tense? Here. Okay. It seems to me that there is everywhere an attempt at present to divert attention from actual influence which Kant exercised in German philosophy, and especially to ignore prudently the value which he set upon himself. Kant was first and foremost proud of his table of categories. With it in his hand, he said, "This is the most difficult thing that could ever be undertaken on behalf of metaphysics." Okay, so an attempt at present to divert attention from the actual influence which Kant exercised on German philosophy. So there's actual influence Kant exercised on the German philosophy, and there is an attempt to divert attention from it. Yeah, and especially ignore the value which he set upon himself. Like the value, again, like he basically blames Kant or accuses Kant of what? Of boasting about tables of categories. Okay, yeah, it's quite clear. Kant was first and foremost proud of his table of categories, with which categories. With it in his hand, he said, "This is the most difficult thing that could ever be undertaken on behalf of metaphysics." Okay, this is Kantian words, supposedly. And so he was proud with the table of categories. By the way, I have it on my wall there. Like, where is it? Oh, it's there. So there on my wall, there's the table of Kantian categories, and they're in Latin, and I wrote them in 2013, 8 years ago. Damn it, when I was studying Kant, I remember this. I was also reading Nietzsche, and I was analyzing this table of categories, and I was basically walking and thinking about it all, like not all the time, but for a couple of weeks or probably a month, what important was there in these categories. But now, again, I'm not going to talk about it, since it will just throw me aside of the main discussion, the main purpose of my studying stream. So Kant was very proud of his table of categories, and he said it like the most difficult thing that ever be undertaken on behalf of metaphysics. So essentially, his idea is that in metaphysics, like in all metaphysics, which is to translate the term to the modern language, metaphysics is just language. So whenever, like when we, and well, now I'm talking from my personal view. I guess it's not common now among philosophers and among scientists, but apparently I've got to this point quite recently, and it's astonishing. It's for me, it's just stunning how simple it is, how simple the entire reality turns out to be when you replace. Well, again, I'm talking about philosophers who study all these concepts, mind, consciousness. Of course, if you are just an ordinary person, and when you hear something like metaphysics is language, it doesn't mean anything for you. But for people who study metaphysics, epistemology, ontology for decades, it may mean very, very serious claim that all metaphysics is just language. So now I'm already here, so I already understand it. Maybe it's a mistaken understanding. I'm not sure, but for me it's very clear, and I want to elaborate on this idea and put it forward. So the whole metaphysics is just language. And another important concept to understand my suggestion, my claim, is that I basically reverse the order. So I say that language creates the mind, not mind creates the language. So it was a common belief among many scientists and philosophers and mystics that we have something which is called the mind. Like Descartes believed it famously in mind, and he thought it's somewhere outside the space, somewhere like outside of the domain of being, let's say, outside of the ontology, and it does not connect it to the being at all. And what I claim, what I say is that this thing, which we call the mind, is produced firstly by our language. So language is something, I don't know how it came to existence. I'm not going to claim anything about that, but the entire idea is that our minds are created by the language. So essentially, if we, like, why other animals can't form what I call mind, or what people call mind, because they don't understand the language. So the entire idea, and again, language, I'm not saying that it's entirely like there's language, and as soon as there's language, it creates the mind. I think it's both. So it's not just language creates the mind, but they are mutually interconnected. And moreover, I would say that actually there's no difference between the mind and the language. So both words, both concepts refer to the same thing. What is this thing? I wouldn't say that I understand it perfectly, but we can see it in the world as letters, words, sentences, grammar, books, all sorts of speeches which we know how to perform, how to use, how to say, but still which we do not understand how, like, their subtle, their subtle structure and their essence. But anyway, just a side note. Let's go on behalf of metaphysics, right? So in metaphysics, the table of categories invented by Kant was the most, like, the first and foremost thing for Kant himself. All right, let us only understand this could be. So basically, could be means it's not just about now, not just about Kantian time, it's about the entire future. So what Nietzsche wants to say that Kant means by this could be that in entire future of human civilization, and Hegel was famous also claiming that there's the end of philosophy. Hegel created an absolute philosophy, and there's nothing more to study, nothing more to do. Just study me, Hegel, and I'll tell you everything what's going on, and you'll, like, there's an absolute, and etc. So could be means that after this table of categories, there's nothing more. So it's the what's the word? What's the word? Like the top of something. Anyway, I forgot the word. It was a funny word. I want to use it, but I forgot exactly. Apotheos? No, not apotheos. It's like apotheosis justification. Something starts with letter A. Apex. No, okay, it doesn't matter. So let us only understand this could be. He was proud of having discovered a new faculty in man, the faculty of synthetic judgment a priori. So Kant discovered a new faculty. What means this faculty? Basically, it's the mind, right? So now we're talking about like, I guess I'll build my understanding like language equals mind. But I guess it may be really helpful to use this idea and develop it through analyzing Nietzschean analysis of other philosophers. But anyway, he said like new faculty in man, the faculty of synthetic judgments a priori. So faculty meaning there's some feature in human beings which allows them to make synthetic judgments. So it may be your brain, maybe some part of your brain, like, whatever, hypothalamus, amygdala, limbic system, neurocortex, your stem, whatever you like. So faculty, but faculty is something real, which allows us to make synthetic judgment a priori. Granting that he deceived himself in this matter, the development and rapid flourishing of German philosophy depended nevertheless on his pride and on the eager rivalry of the young generation to discover, if possible, something, at all events, new faculties, of which to be still prouder. Okay, so the idea is like even if Kant was what? Not false. Okay, even if Kantian ideas were false, and how to say even if Kant was wrong, even if Kant was wrong, still the whole generation of German philosophers were really inspired by Kant, by his flourishing, whatever, by his metaphysics and by his work, and they started looking for other faculties in man, to what purpose? To create better philosophies, to find something else. But let us reflect for a moment. It is high time to do so. So it's like, let's think about it. Let's think about faculties, about Kant. How are synthetic judgments a priori possible? Kant asked himself. And what is really his answer? By means of a means, faculty, right? So there's something that allows us to make synthetic judgment a priori. So again, I think I have to make a pause to talk a little bit about synthetic judgments. So synthetic judgments, basically it's kind of evaluative judgments, a priori meaning like before experience. So it's when you, for example, in science, so what are we doing? We, we not just look at facts, we make experiments. We we form a theory and then go in the world, to conduct some experiments to see to look for the evidence of our theories. Or we make a theory and try to disprove it by looking the contra evidence, something that will make this theory wrong. And so it's domain of experiential science. So in all knowledge in modern science, maybe not in modern philosophy, but in science, basically, after Francis Bacon, all knowledge is based on empirical evidence. So if you claim something, you have to provide us with an empirical evidence. Of course, you may do some syllogisms, and in math there's no empirical evidence, just pure numbers. But they're logically true. And in math, there's very strong. It's very hard to do math. I mean, it's like their proofs, they're analytic. The point is, in math, there's no synthetic judgments. It's analytic judgments. So we take a triangle and say the triangle has 3 angles. That's why it's a triangle. So you don't add anything new. You basically take a definition and you go on and analyze this definition. And by doing so, you don't add anything new to the concept. But synthetic judgments is basically when you add something new, when you make 2 things and make one thing out of these 2 things. And the point is, it's easy to do a posteriori by looking at the experience, right? So you may take 2 concepts, like one famous, I've heard this week I watched lots of lectures on linguistics, and one famous example was jailbait. So what is a jailbait? It's from 2 different frames, like jail and bait. We take like 2 words, 2 concepts, and we blend them in another concept, which is like jailbait is basically a girl like under the age of 18, and if you have sex with this girl, you're going to be put in jail. And jailbait, it's basically usually there's some person, some high status person, and to put him down, you basically hire a young girl and make her seduce this person, and finally to put him in jail, like to put him down. And the jailbait is like very like just a concept. And the idea is like we take 2 words, 2 concepts, and blend them together in one. And it's easy to do with experience. So we have real experience, but talking about synthetic judgments, it's something before the experience. So we may say like everything changes. So it's actually one of the Kantian proposition. It's like everything changes. Like how do we know? We don't need like to have experience to understand that everything is changing. It seems to be a purely synthetic judgment. We don't form it on experience. But actually, we form it actually on experience, but we still have to, we still may imagine that everything. No, it's actually, well, it's a posteriori. It's not clear synthetic judgments, even though we may still can imagine that, it's just change, like time, for example. So when we talk about time and space, like the question is, does time exist outside? Like if there's no consciousness, there's no life, does time still exist? Okay, I'm digressing so far. Okay, synthetic judgments, well, can't say by a faculty. So we have a capacity or faculty which allows us to make synthetic judgments. What kind of faculty? It's basically our reason or our mind. So our mind just sees it just logically creates a certain knowledge out of pure imagination. And this knowledge, it doesn't need to be proved by experience. It's just true because we have this mind. Well, probably, yeah. That's at least how I understand. Okay, let's go on. But unfortunately, not in 5 words, but so circumstantially, imposingly, and with such display of German profundity and verbal flourishes, or flourishness, I guess, there's flourishes, that one altogether loses sight of the comical German silliness. I'll read in English. German silliness involved in such an answer. So basically, he says like all these synthetic judgments a priori. Kant basically everything Kant wrote in his critique of pure reason may be said in one sentence. But of course, Nietzsche mocks just Kant. Actually, there were some really profound stuff in Kant. And to say, oh, maybe not, I don't know. Like for me, to be honest, I didn't read Kant after reading Nietzsche at all. So I listened to a couple of lectures on Kant and some videos, but I didn't reread the critique of pure reason. after reading Nietzsche. And Nietzsche, he very strongly attacks Kant in many of his books, not just in Beyond Good and Evil. So Kant, especially an old Kant, a moralist, was Nietzsche's the first enemy. Later, like one of his more harsh enemies. Anyway, people were beside themselves with delight over this new faculty, and the jubilation reached its climax when Kant further discovered the moral faculty in man. And again, moral faculty, it's basically, there are 3 books: the critique of pure reason, the critique of capacity of judgment, and there was another faculty, probably like Kant's aesthetics, like the critique of practical reason. Yeah, practical reason, I guess it was about moral. No, judgments, yeah. I guess both of them dealt with this concept of moral faculty. The practical reason as well as the what was pure reason, practical reason. No, I guess aesthetic judgment is like it's something else. So practical reason probably deals with moral faculty. Okay, at that time, Germans were still moral, yet not yet dabbling in the politics of hard fact. Yeah, it's like, he makes fun of Germans. Yeah, now like Nietzschean time, there's lots of science already is going on, but in Kantian time, their religion was very soon. Kant himself, he didn't go against religion. I mean, he wrote proofs for God's existence, even though, of course, he didn't believe in any Christian God, but still, he could throw away the concept of God, but still his worldview was highly influenced by this concept, and he lived in time when this idea was extremely powerful. So popes and priests were actually in Germany, they were probably more influential than dukes and kings, but not as influential, of course, as they were like few centuries before, like in 15th century or 16th century. But anyway, okay. Then came the honeymoon of German philosophy. So honeymoon, all the young theologians of the Tübingen institution went immediately into the groves, all seeking for faculties. And what did they not find in that innocent, rich, and still youthful period of German spirit, to which Romanticism, the malicious fairy, piped and sang, when one could not yet distinguish between findings and inventings? Yeah, okay, and what did I just can't read it. Well, I understand it how it should be read, but I can't read like it's just an exclamation, right? The entire sentence, just one exclamation. And what did they not find when one could not yet distinguish between finding and inventing? Yeah, it's like inventing. That's like Kant, for example, he thought he found. That's, I guess, the Nietzschean, the most difficult idea to understand, that in Kant believed that he found something, that it's something in nature, that's something like some kind of absolute truth, something real, these faculties and mind and language, etc. But for Nietzsche, it's just an inventing. So whatever you create with language, it's pure invention. Like everything, like all this metaphysics, all this linguistics, it's just pure invention, and it's based on nothing. Like there may be the real world, but the point is that in science and in metaphysics, basically you create things as well as you find them. And sometimes you create them by finding them, and sometimes you find them by creating them. So it's very hard to say. And again, this yeah, I guess from this point of view, from pure skepticism, we may say that there's no, like for Nietzsche, there seems to be a world. So Nietzsche still distinguishes between idealism, like in Kantian sense, and let's say naive realism. That like naive realism, there's an objective world and objective reality, and Kant basically denies the existence of it whatsoever. He says we don't know anything about objective reality. What we know is what we can tell by faculties of our brain, whatever our minds, and this is our destiny. All right, above all, a faculty for the transcendental. Schelling christened it intellectual intuition. So it was Schelling termed like intellectual intuition. And thereby, again, transcendental may be considered as a kind of like the literal meaning of the word, like beyond horizon, or beyond experience. I was simultaneously studying Buddhism in 2013 when I was studying Kantian philosophy, and most of these terms, like transcendental and beyond, etc., they came from Buddhism, not just Buddhism, but also from like Upanishads and Eastern religious. And Kant, when you read simultaneously, Vedas, I didn't read Vedas, but I read Upanishads and some Buddhist works. And transcendental, it's just normal. Like Kant seems to be an inventor of this transcendental philosophy, but transcendental, it was in Eastern philosophy. This word was quite common for thousands of years before Kant, and Kant basically just translated it, or introduced it to European thought. But anyway, it's like transcendental. Yeah, Schelling, for example, again, intellectual intuition. Basically, when you don't need any evidence, don't need any experience, you basically just realize something, have an insight. Oh, now I understand like God, or I understand the world, I understand the universe. I grasp the meaning of life, the point of existence. How did you do that? Well, it was my intellectual intuition. I can tell you any step. Just I was sitting under the tree, and suddenly whatever God fell on my on my head. Now I know everything, and I'm gonna tell you like for hours and hours how I discovered how like revelation came to me, and now I know everything. Well, yeah, it's like for science, it's very stupid. I mean, if you want to claim something, there must be a certain, you may trace back how you came to your conclusion. And it's the same thing which I claim right now, for example, about language and mind. So I say, oh, okay, now I understand that the nature of language and the nature of mind aren't different, and I understand that it's some kind of intellectual intuition, but it's actually not intellectual intuition. Since I was came to this idea, I recorded studying streams on consciousness. So I like 15 hours I were talking basically about the consciousness, and analyzed the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article of consciousness, and I also analyzed the article on Wikipedia. Then I watched John Searle for a couple of months, his lectures. I was writing in my journal, and finally this I may trace back all these steps, but now I don't see it's unnecessary for me, since I want to I see now it kind of in a bleary, some foggy way, but I see how to make it. I don't want to trace the same steps. I want to just create a kind of theory and see and show how it works. Since most of there was some some jumps. I watched one lecture, another lecture, then I compared language. I tried to substitute, try to replace every word when we use words like mental or metaphysical or everything related to mind and reason. With language, it makes perfect sense. And I started replacing words in my head, and I realized it makes perfect sense. And now I don't need to think about some extra whatever domain where mind exists. It's all just language. Mind is embodied mind. It doesn't mean that there's mind only in your head, like which which is basically your body is manifestation of it, but it's also all language outside, like all these words on the screen, it's just pure mind, and all videos on YouTube is just pure mind, and it's everywhere already. That's so funny. But anyway, and thereby gratify the most earnest longings of the naturally pious and inclined Germans. Yeah, basically, you don't need to prove anything, but you just say intellectual intuition. This is the thing. No need in proofs or books or whatever. Now, how do you know something? I know because I have an intellectual intuition. The same word for belief, basically, but new concept. There's have intellectual, something refers to the mind, and intuition also some sort of metaphysical notion. But yeah, it looks plausible, and when there's few books written about it and there's some play upon words, you may be confused very quickly. Like Kant, you read Kant, and Kant is the greatest philosopher. Lots of people still believe that Kant is the greatest philosopher of all times, and some of them, who really say that publicly on YouTube, never actually read Kant. And they probably read like one critique of pure reason, or maybe few of his critiques. Probably never actually tried to analyze what he was writing. And of course, you can't understand Kant without understanding other philosophers. So to read one Kant is just useless. The whole sequence, for me, Kant was the last one. I didn't go further. I didn't read Leibniz, and I didn't read Wolff and other philosophers who preceded Kant. But I read lots of, following philosophers like Hegel, Feuerbach, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and all the others, all the rest. But anyway, one can do no great wrong to the whole of this exuberant and eccentric movement, which was really youthfulness, notwithstanding that it disguised itself so boldly in hoary and senile conceptions, than to take it seriously or even treat it with moral indignation. Yeah, so no great wrong. So if you take it seriously, you'll do it a lot of mischief. Enough, however, the world grew older and the dream vanished. A time came when people rubbed their foreheads, and they still rub them today. People had been dreaming, and first and foremost old Kant, by means of a means, faculty, he had said, or at least meant to say. But is that an answer, an explanation? Or is it not rather merely a repetition of the question? How does opium induce sleep? By means of a means, faculty. Namely, the virtus dormitiva replies the doctor in Molière, quia est in eo virtus dormitiva, cuius est natura sensus auso pire. Still can translate like, okay, just basically by means of how opium makes you whatever, asleep, like by means of sensus as superior, which is like opium, like opium faculty of the old, not faculty, but what is it? By something which is opium itself, like the essence of opium itself. But such replies belong to the realm of comedy, and it is high time to replace the Kantian question, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible, by another question, why is belief in such judgments necessary? Okay, so the comedy comes to an end, and there's a serious question, why is belief in such judgments necessary? In fact, it is high time that we should understand that such judgments must be believed to be true, for the sake of the preservation of creatures like ourselves, though they still might naturally be false judgments. So it's not just like why they're necessary, but we have to believe in these judgments if we want to preserve our species. So these judgments, they may be false, but still they are necessary for a particular purpose. Yeah, it's like the belief in God is necessary for, in that time, in 17th century, 18th century, 19th century, maybe in 20th century, maybe in 21st century as well. So believe in God is necessary for it. Like we have to have this concept, even if it's false, like according to Nietzsche. So God is false, but we still have to have it unless we don't want to, to be evaporated from the earth by some, barbarians or whatever. Or more plainly spoken and roughly and readily, synthetic judgments a priori should not be possible at all. We have no right to them. In our mouths, they are nothing but false judgments. Only, of course, the belief in their truth is necessary, as plausible belief in ocular evidence belonging to the perspective view of life. So again, now I guess I'll take some modern scientific concepts, which I got familiar this week by watching lectures on linguistics by a guy named Mark Turner. So the idea is like blending and conceptual integration. So the idea basically is that we take two concepts from different frames and blend them together. And in this frame, so we may say like in this blend, when we take a concept from one domain and another concept from another domain, so we create a blend. What is a blend? It's kind of imagination. And to create a blend, to really understand better concepts from different ideas, or just to express whatever we want to say, or to create something new, some new knowledge, we have to believe that, this is like inside of this blend. When we try to take the quality of one thing and assign it to the quality of another thing, we may, or, to make something impossible, like, well, I don't have any examples now. I don't want to make any special examples, since I think I'm not prepared for that. But the essential idea is that in our imagination, to see the future, to be able to analyze difficult concepts, and to be able to think differently, to think, to think creatively, we always have to blend different frames. And in this blend, we have to understand that, like, what we blend, it's false. So if we take a horse, and if we take a bird, and say, okay, there's like, we create a blend, and in this blend we make a Pegasus, like a horse with wings, and we understand it's false, but it must be necessary for particular purposes. So it may be necessary for making fairy tales, or it may be necessary for talking about some particular things, or telling some stories, or making some comedy, or all sorts of purposes. And it shouldn't be true, but the belief in this still must be understood. So it's like we may believe in it even if it's not true, and it's very important to have these beliefs. They may have a significant influence on our development, but still we shouldn't be mistaken. We shouldn't, like, we create an idea of Santa Claus, right? And to make children happy at Christmas. And well, it's the same like with Kantian philosophy and this ideas of faculties by means of faculties. Is what Nietzsche wants to say is the same as, imagine we create Santa Claus and we fooled our children, but then finally we start believing in Santa Claus, since everybody who knew that we created him for certain purposes to entertain children, everybody died, and who is left? It's only children who doesn't know that Santa Claus was created by somebody else. So you see the idea, and it's kind of interesting example. Anyway, let's go on. And finally, to call to mind the enormous influence with German philosophy, I hope you understand it's right to inverted commas goose feet, yeah, German philosophy, in inverted commas, has exercised throughout the whole of Europe, there's no doubt that a certain virtus dermitiva had a share in it. So, virtus dermitiva, again, it's kind of a quality which is in opium, which makes people fall asleep, or which decreases their senses, which weakens their feelings. Yeah, it's kind of a painkiller or something like that. Yeah, and Nietzsche basically just makes a nice metaphor here, saying that German philosophy it basically was kind of opium. And later, the famous idea, it wasn't even later, it was said before by Marx, like religion is opium for masses. Thanks to German philosophy, it was a delight to the noble idlers, the virtuous, the mystics, the artists, the 3/4 Christians, and the political obscurantists of all nations, to find an antidote to the still overwhelming sensualism which overflowed from the last century into this. In short, sensus asso pire. Okay, to find an antidote to the still overwhelming sensualism. Yeah, it's like in 18th century, there was a huge development of sensualism. And it started, I guess, from English philosophers like Locke, Hume. Hume wasn't the sensual. Okay, let's say it started from Locke, and then later it was developed in French philosophy, basically through Diderot, and yeah, there was Holbach and Hobbes, I guess. Yeah, they were basically, and this started from not from Locke. It started from Francis Bacon and Newton, and all these ideas that like sensualism. I guess it's similar here to mechanicism. I mean that there's only nature, and there's certain tools like algorithms, whatever, in nature, which may be analyzed, proved, and used for particular purposes. But yeah, antidote. So basically, Nietzsche here, yeah, again, he doesn't say it wasn't something bad. He basically says there's overwhelming sensualism. And Nietzsche doesn't like sensualism, by the way. I guess later he will criticize it. But the idea is that, when you basically have something like German philosophy, you may be not deluded by French and English sensualism. That there's only like the only thing we have is just feelings or our senses. And reason is basically some kind of mechanism which evolves on our senses and is basically the continuation of our senses, which now I think is kind of the case. So we have feelings and reason, which is language, basically. So language evolves it's kind of the highest point of evolution of our senses. Language itself is certain feeling, and probably nothing else, but maybe something else too. I don't know. But now it seems for me language is just the only thing which we have. Anyway, so I think it's time to finish this video. I was talking too much. This week I'm gonna memorize this entire thing as I did yesterday with the previous thing. And next time when I'm gonna make a studying stream, hopefully in the end of the next week or maybe in the middle of the next week, I'm going to start from reciting it from my memory and then go on and talk about the next paragraph. All right, so that's all. See you next time.